In the past, I've done an entire series on dialogue trees using behavior trees, and I want to redo all of that, but instead we're going to be working with state trees. So you can see we have dialogue progression, we have dialogue choices, which have different paths to them, and so on and so forth. This all runs off of a state tree system. You don't need to have seen the previous behavior tree version of this to keep up with this at all. You will need to know the basics of state trees. Obviously, I do have an entire series on that if you need to get caught up on state trees in general, but this is what we're going to be making, and there's going to be a couple of videos back to back about this. So let's start here with an entirely empty project. Every one of these episodes, as usual, is going to have its own project download, as well as a series completed project download for patrons and YouTube members down below in the description. But let's get started on setting up the actual dialogue display box, because I think that is going to be the cornerstone and it's going to be the most important thing that we set up early on. So we go into user interface, we make a widget blueprint, will be a user widget, and we'll call that WBP dialogue box. I'm going to set this up fairly quickly as a piece of UI design. So we'll start this off by adding in a vertical box. I'm going to set this to desired. That's just a previewing thing that doesn't actually impact any of the performance, but that'll let me see what this thing actually looks like. We're going to put a size box into that, which is going to hold a border inside of it. And inside of that border, we're going to be putting a text, and this is going to be the text that's going to display the name. So this size box is going to be relatively small. If we come over here, we set the width and height override to something reasonable, like maybe 150 in width and then something like 20 in the height. Now we'll go into the text, set the text color for now to black, and go into the font and just kind of make that smaller until it fits in there. So something like this. Then we can close the size box again and add another size box into the vertical box. So we're going to have two size boxes on top of each other. In this one, we're going to put a horizontal box because we're going to be putting a couple of things side by side. That being yet another size box, and we're going to be putting in a scroll box. The size box is going to contain an image. The scroll box is going to be containing the actual text, just in case we need to be able to put a lot of text in there. It will be scrollable. You should try to avoid that, but just in case you need it, it's nice to have. So let's put in an image into the size box and then select our size box. I'm going to set the width and height override both to 150. And then in the scroll box, we're going to add in the text that we're going to be working with. I want to come up back to the size box that's going to be holding our image and our text. And this one I'm going to set the width override to about 1500. Just so that we have a good context of how big this is. Now, there's going to be a couple of things that we need to patch up a little bit to make it look slightly better. The first one is the first size box is set to fill horizontal and vertical. We're going to just outline that to the left and to the top. And I'm going to go into its padding and say that it has about 10 units of padding to the bottom, so that there's a little bit of distance between the name and the character portrait. Then for the scroll box, we're going to set this to fill the entire room that it has, and then going into the actual text, I'm going to set the padding to be about 10 units from all sides so that it's not that snugly up against the edge. Now if you want to, you can also still wrap this text within a border or something like that. So wrap with a border and then make the border have that padding instead of the text. So we'll set the text to 00. Border will have the padding. And we're going to set that to fill instead. Or we can get rid of the borders padding and give it back to the text if you prefer, so that the text is a little bit inside of the border. I will also set the text color to black. And now we have some sort of text box. Maybe the border, we can set the brush color to a little bit more of a gray, and then the alpha to 0.5, so that's kind of see-through. You can kind of style this however you want, right? We're just going to make this functional, be creative with it in your own fancy ways. Importantly, in the text, we're going to look for wrap, and we want to be able to auto wrap this text, so that if we go into this text block and we copy this over a bunch of times, it will automatically wrap itself around. Now there is the issue that it makes the whole dialog box grow, which we don't want to do. So if we come up here into the size box again, we can set a height override to force it to be a certain height. In which case, I'm going to go with 150 because we made the character portrait 150 by 150. And now you can see it has turned into a scroll box. Which again, generally you want to probably just prevent too much text at once from showing up on screen, but it's a good failsafe. Now, some of these parts are going to need to be variables because we're going to be setting them and changing them, obviously. So we want to set this text to being variable. We want to set the text for the name that we have here to being the variable. Also going to set the preview name to just name. Now we want to set the image to being variable as well. And let's compile that. So now we have this first setup done. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back into our project and we're going to go for blueprint and we're going to make a structure, and this will be our dialogue structure. This is going to contain everything that every piece of individual dialogue will contain. So something like a texture 2D for the character portrait that we had. So we have a texture 2D for that. I'll call that something like face. We'll add a variable for the name, which is going to be a text variable. Then we'll add a variable for the actual text. Obviously, that's what this is going to be, which is also going to be a text variable. The reason we're using text here is because texts work with translation tables. So if you want to translate your game down the line, you can just provide in a translation table and everything should work, which also really does help with like the whole scroll box thing, because in a different language, some lines might end up being longer than others and they don't really fit anymore. The scroll box will just take care of that for you, again, as a failsafe. And then I also want to add in like a sound, which will be of type sound base. This lets you add in dialogue clips, essentially. Unreal has its own built-in dialogue system that is kind of unfinished in a lot of ways, which you could use here. I prefer to just put in sound clips and do all that stuff myself within this dialogue system instead. Now, if you need anything else to be in here, like a certain type of text color, or maybe a specific type of fonts, or whatever you want, you just add that into this dialogue structure that we're going to be using. So now we can use this whatever we want in our project. So let's go into our event graph on our dialog box, where we'll make a new custom event, and we'll call that set new dialog. Set new dialog is going to have one input. So if we go into the inputs, we can make one right here, and this will be the new dialog. And that's going to be of type dialog, the structure that we just made. So this one. As you can see, Unreal has a couple of things to do with its own dialogue system. Again, we're going to be ignoring that entirely for now. We're just going to set up our own custom implementation for everything. So from there, we pull it out and we break it up into its individual parts, and we'll just go, hey, image, we'll get a reference to that, and we'll set brush from texture, and we'll just check, hey, is this face valid or not? Because if it is valid, we want to set it to that new face. If it is not valid, we're just going to skip this. That'll allow us to make a dialogue structure without a face in it, to just tell the system, hey, keep whatever face you're displaying right now. Because otherwise it's going to be really annoying for every single line that you put in, having to put in the same face. If a character is speaking for like 10, 20 lines at a time, having to re-pick the same face over and over and over again is just kind of tedious. So this way you only have to do it for the first line of any given character, and after that you can just kind of leave it empty. Then we need to actually name these text blocks properly, because I have no idea which one is which. So let's go back into the name and call this one name. And then this one can just be text. So now in the variables here, we can get our name and set the text on set text. You can also do it directly on the variable. I like using the function just because. And we're going to be setting that to the value of whatever name we got put in. And then we'll do the same thing with the text. So we do the text variable, and then we just hook up the text to that new text that we're supposed to be setting. Now, the sound we can pull off and just spawn sound 2D. And this is going to give us a return value, and we'll save that as a variable, and we'll call that something like last sound. The reason that we do that is because every time we spawn a new sound, it makes a new sound component, or an audio component as it's called, which will let us stop that sound as well. Because if you're going to be mashing through this dialogue, every time you move on to the next line of dialogue, you want the current line of dialogue's audio to stop, otherwise they're going to be overlapping. So I guess at the start of this set new dialogue, what we should do is we should get our last dialogue. We can change that to a validated get, and if it is not valid, we can just move on. But if it is valid, we can stop this audio and then hook that up into the flow as well. So now we have our set new dialogue thing working, mostly. There's quite a lot of setup going on in this project before we actually get to like the fun and juicy part, but as the setup is done, everything after this will become a lot easier to deal with, because we're essentially just going to be calling this function about 1 billion times. So setting this up properly from the start is pretty important. Now that we have a dialog box that works properly, let's make a new user widget again. So blueprint widget, and we'll call this something like WBP dialog display, or something maybe a little bit easier to differentiate between. It's going to have a canvas panel, and then we're going to put in a vertical box for this one as well. Inside of that vertical box, we're going to be putting in our dialog box. The reason we're doing this in the vertical box is mostly for future-proofing reasons, because we're going to be adding things like choice buttons and skipping to the next dialog bit in future videos. For now, we're only going to be using the dialog box, but we're going to be dynamically adding other elements to this in the future. Now, we just set this up to be whatever size we want it to be, and then we kind of set up the anchors for it so that it scales properly with our screen as well. So for the time being, we're going to go into the event graph here and just make a temporary custom event. We're going to be replacing some of this code later on, but I just want this to function for now. So let's say test dialog. And that's going to take our dialog box. It's going to use that set new dialog. We're going to take in the parameter for our new dialog and just pass it through. And for now, this is all that actually needs to do. So let's set up our state tree, at least the beginning of our state tree, shall we? So for that, make sure that you go into plugins and you look for state tree and you find the gameplay state tree plugin and make sure to enable it. You might need to restart your engine. New state tree, and you should be able to add one with a normal state tree component over here. So let's call this StTest for state tree test. Open it up, and that opens up our normal state tree view. So we'll go here and make a new task immediately. Call it STT run single dialog or something along those lines. And that's going to have a variable for the dialog display, which is of course going to be our dialog display widget that we made. So we have our WPP dialog display object reference, and we're going to make this a category input so that we're forced to provide this in, because this is obviously a fairly important one. So when we enter this state, we get our dialog display and we test dialog. That dialog that we're going to be putting in will just promote to a variable. So do that and expose it. And that is all that we have to do there for now. So if we go into our state tree and we add a new child state here, we'll call that test dialog. We set up a task for that with our new STT run single dialog. And our dialog will just be, hey, we want to use this face. It's going to be called Facey Mac Face. And its text is going to be, I have a face. And then we pick some sort of sound. Ideally, you would have like a voice acted clip here, of course. We're just going to go for like, I don't know, explosion. Sounds pretty good. Now, the state tree, if we try to compile, is going to complain to us because we need to provide in a value for our dialog display. But how are we going to get a dialog display? Well, for that, we're also going to be making a new task again. So we make a new state tree blueprint task, and we'll call that STT for state tree task, and we'll call that create dialog display. Here on enter state, we're going to be creating a widget, and that is going to be a widget of type dialog display. And we'll simply promote that to a variable and call that display. and make that of category outputs. Now when this state tree finishes, so when we exit this state, because it's going to be on the root, so we're never going to exit it until the state tree as a whole is finished. We want to also take this display and remove from parent, so that it removes it from the screen. And we need to add it to the screen as well, so after we make the variable, we also add it to the viewport. And this will now take care of adding it as soon as the state tree starts, and removing it as soon as the state tree is finished. Only thing we need to do is add that task to our root. So we add a task again, create dialog display. And because any of the child states of this root can access any of its outputs, we can now go into our test dialog and say, hey, our dialog display is going to be the STT create dialog display. The only annoying part about this is that you do have to do this for every single state in your state tree that's going to like run the dialog, but you can just copy paste it over with shift right click and shift left click. So it shouldn't be that big a deal. Now if we try to compile, it'll work properly. Let's make a quick test actor. I'm going to make a blueprint class, just a normal actor BP speaker. Just going to add a quick little cube so that we can see where it is in the world. Also, there seems to be no details panel. There we go. And then we add a state tree component, a normal one, not an AI one, in which we give in the state tree. So this will just run on begin play now. We'll work on manually triggering this a little bit later. For now, I just want to see, hey, if we run this state tree, it should add the dialog to the screen with the settings that we give in here. So let's give that a shot. As you can see, it does it with the sound as well, which kind of caught me off guard, kind of scared me, honestly. It's got a Facey McFace that says, I have a face. So the basic setup works. Now we can start using that to actually build out some more complex dialogue with more than just one line. But for now, I do think it is probably a good place to end off this first introductory video. Next time we'll start working on having multiple lines that we can easily write and then play one after the next, after the next, after the next. Let's keep going with our state tree based dialogue system. So last time we set up a bunch of building blocks, making our dialog box, our dialog display, a quick little speaker blueprint, and our initial state tree setup where everything is going to come together and actually be usable. But so far we only have one automatically playing line of dialogue, and that's kind of everything that we do have. So today I want to do two things. I want to make this only work on interaction, which is going to be relatively easy to do. And then I want to make something that allows me to have multiple lines of dialogue easily following each other up until we make a choice. The choice is going to be probably something that we program in the next video, just have a dedicated video to just that. But I want to set up the system that allows us to have multiple lines of dialogue back to back to back. But first, let's make this thing only work on interaction. So for that, I'm just going to build the most simple interaction system that you could possibly think of. So we're going to make a blueprint interface. We'll have BPI interaction, open that up. In the new function we're going to be creating will be interact. It's going to take an input of an interacting actor. In this case, that's not actually something that we're going to be using, but that's just like good practice to be able to send through if you need it. And then as an output, we'll send back whether or not the successful interaction happened. So successful interaction. Let's go into our BP speaker and add in its class settings, the new interface for BPI interaction. And here we now have a new interface function for interact. I'm going to set that to being true. And when we get interacted with, we pull in our state tree components and we simply start logic. Now that also does mean that we want to not start the logic automatically anymore, because we only want to start it when we actually like interact with this thing. But that's about all there is to it. So let's go into our third person character. Again, we just need to set this up like super quick. I'm going to set up a debug key for F. We'll get sphere overlap. I'm going to make an array for the object types. That'll be world static, that'll be born, and that'll be world dynamic. That's pretty much all the actors that we're ever going to need. The sphere position will be the get actor location. And the sphere radius, let's say that everything within like 250 units will be available for us. Then we do a for each loop with break, and we just try to interact with everything. Interacting actor is just going to be self, do that in the loop body. And after every one, we check, hey, was that a successful interaction? Because if it was, we're going to break out of the loop, so that we only interact with one thing at a time. So this is the most basic interaction system in the world. But now that we have that, we can walk up to this thing, press F, and it will display the dialogue. So it won't get rid of it because we have no way of ending our dialogue tree, but that's what we're going to be working on right now. So the way that we're going to set this up is with data tables. So let's make a data table for an example here. So we can just search for data table, which is going to be this one over here. And we can pick a struct that it's going to be using. We made a dialog struct in the last video because I knew I was going to be using data tables. Essentially, you could also just make an array of dialogues and populate that entirely within the state tree itself. That's going to be a little bit messy as you scale up, I would argue. So having this in a data table is probably just a little bit easier to work with. So we're going to make that, call that dt dialog1. And now we can start adding rows here. We're not going to be using the row name, really. You can just add as many as you want. And here we add in a face. So let's say again, we use this green one. And the way we have it set up, we don't actually need to supply in the green one again and again, because it's checking, hey, do we send through a valid face to begin with? If we don't, just keep the one that we already had. And then we can start supplying names. So I think we called him like Facey McFaceface, right? Now, if you really wanted to, you could do the same thing with the names. The texts are always going to, of course, be related. But if you really wanted to like make this very user-friendly, you could go into your dialog box. I'm just like thinking about this right now. You could get the name. You could get the length if you turn it into a string. So toString. You can get the length, and you just check whether or not that length is greater than 0. So we set the name here. We just check, hey, are we trying to set it to a string with a length of greater than 0? If so, we set it. If not, we just pass it up. And this way you only have to fill out the name once as well. Do bear in mind that if you're using text and you're using something like translation tables, this might end up confusing you a little, because if there's somewhere in a translation table that you didn't translate the name properly, your entire dialogue system might kind of like collapse in on itself. So do be careful about that. But I think, didn't I type Facey McFaceface here? Now it will just keep this name until we provide in a new next name, which is nice. The text will be, I have a face. And then the sound will be whatever, right? So we can just dockable window open, do this one. And then the next one, we only really need to put in the text. So do you have a face with a different sound? Maybe, I don't know, just enter play. And then the last one, faces are nice. With, again, a random sound. You would, of course, record this as dialogue and whatever, but we're just going to set this to being like fire. Sure, why not? Actually, let's do fire first, so that we can see that it interrupts when we go to the next one. So this one will instead just be the camera shutter, why not? So we now have our dialog table for our first dialog interaction. Now we just need to build a system that takes this one row at a time and displays it in our dialog display widget. So let's get into that. We already have our dialog box open, so let's start building some more functionality. I'm going to make a new custom event and call that run dialog table. And we're not going to do too much with that at the moment, because we're going to just make immediately another custom event as well, which will be start new dialog. And you'll see why we set these up separately in a moment, but run dialog table will just run the start new dialog. And start new dialog is going to take in an input of a data table. So data table, and call that dialog table. Now, the one downside to this is if you have a bunch of other types of data tables in your project as well, that might like mess these things up a little bit. We'll build in some protection to make sure that the data table that we're using actually uses dialog structs. But an alternative way to deal with this might be to use data assets and make a specific dialogue asset type that just has like an array of dialogues. That way, when you get the drop-down menu, you only get dialogue assets, which might be a little bit nicer. I just want to use data tables to keep things a little simpler and a little cleaner for now. There's a bunch of ways to put together a bunch of lines, is kind of what I'm getting at. So if you want to change up a little bit here, because it may suit your situation better, feel free to. Either way, when we set a new dialog, what we want to do is we want to promote this new data table to a variable. And then we want to also set a variable here for the index that we're going to be working with, and that will be an integer, because we need to keep track of how far along we are in the data table, of course. And anytime we start a new dialog, we want to set that back to 0. Then we want to make another custom event again. We're almost done with the custom events, I promise you. I'll make a new custom event, and we're going to call this progress dialog. And I'm going to take the thing that we made up here, which is in set new dialog, we had this last sound stop playing it, if it exists. We're actually going to take that from set new dialog, and we're going to set that up in progress dialog instead. It's kind of alright to keep it where it was, but I like having it in here for like the way that it progresses through the code. But next up, we want to make not a new custom event. No. We're done with custom events. We're going to instead be making a function. So let's make a function which will be getNext dialog, and that's going to have a couple of outputs. Of course, that's going to have a dialog output, the struct that we made. So let's call that dialog. But it's also going to have an output for whether or not it found any dialog to begin with. So that's going to be a bool, and we'll call that something along the lines of found dialog. So we'll take our dialog table, and first and foremost, we turn this into a validated get. And if this is not a valid value at all, obviously we immediately return with found dialog being false, because we're trying to get dialog out of a table that doesn't exist. But then we actually use this dialog table, and we get the data table row struct. That gets you a reference to the object for your blueprint struct. So you can check whether or not that is equal dialog structure that we made over here, and put that into a branch node as well. So if that is the same, that means that we're using a data table that uses dialog struct, which is what we want. If we're for some reason providing in a different type of data table, we just return false as well, because we don't want to progress in that case. If that is true as well, though, we want to get the data table rows. So we get data table row names. You need to get them by the names, and then you can get a specific row from this array that gets output here. So we get a copy from whatever index we are currently on, and then we use the data table itself again to now get row, just get data table row, and that takes in a name. Again, if the row was not found, we return with found dialog being false, but if the row was found, we finally connect the out row into the dialog. We say, hey, we found some dialog, and we can move on. So this is the entire getNext dialog function that we're going to be using. After we stop playing the dialog, we get next dialog, and we check, hey, did we find the next dialog, yes or no? If we didn't find it, that means that whatever dialog we're going through has now finished. So we're going to broadcast that to whatever is listening to it. So make an event dispatcher called dialog finished, and drag that in, call it out on false for this branch. However, if we did find anything, we use the one custom event that we already had, is the set new dialog. So set new dialog, and we connect up the dialog to this input. And then we also take our index, because we've now updated our dialog. So next time we go through this, we need to have a new next index. So we just pull up that and increment integer. And now we can start working backwards. So when we start a new dialog, we take in a dialog table, set that to our new value. We set our index back to 0, and then we just start by progressing the dialog through its first iteration. And then run dialog table is simply going to only start up that new dialog. And of course, needs to be given in the dialog reference. You can, if you really want to, get rid of this event and just call this one directly. The reason that we do it this way is because this way you can technically like put this on protected or private, so that other classes can't access it and only access this one, which is a little bit more descriptive and a little bit more clear as to what it actually does. But we're not going to bother too much with that for now. So with that all set up, let's move back to using that in our dialog display, the thing that holds the dialog box that we've just been working on. Because, of course, this thing is going to need to send through the information to the dialog box that it's going to need to display new dialog. So let's make a new custom event here and call that run dialog table. That's going to take in our dialog box that we have and we start new dialog. And of course, we just pull through the reference to the table that we're going to be using. And now we need to dynamically add a button to progress to the next text because we didn't have that here. And in some cases, we need to specifically not have that as well, because if it is a dialog that offers you a choice, you just don't want to be able to press next. Your button should display the potential choices that you can make. So we need to dynamically add and remove this as it becomes relevant. So let's make a custom button that can do that. So we make a new user interface, blueprint widget, user widget, call that WBP custom button. This one's going to be remarkably simple. We just put in a button, and then within that button, we're going to have a little bit of text. Make sure that the text is a variable. I like setting my widgets to using desired size so that they're a little bit better sized. I like also to make the text black. And then in the event graph, all that we really need to do is we need to add in the text, which is going to be a text variable, make it instance editable and expose it on spawn. And then also add in an index. This is the reason that we're making a custom button, because these buttons are going to be given indexes. Specifically, that is relevant for when we have multiple buttons, for when we have dialog choice. Right now, that's not super relevant, but we just want to set this up to be easily implementable later down the line. So give this an integer for an index, which is also going to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. Then on construct, we take our text block and we set the text to whatever we get given in on the exposed on spawn variable. Then when the button is clicked, we have this onClicked event. We're just going to forward our own custom onClicked event that also sends through the index. So we make a new event dispatcher, call this onClicked as well. Maybe you want to name this like onClicked custom or onClicked with index or something along the lines. We're going to give that an input, new parameter. It's going to be an integer and we'll just call that index and drag that in. So when we click on this button, we're just going to call out onClicked with our custom index so that we can send that through to whatever is listening. And the whole reason that we did that is so now in the dialog display, when we run a new dialog table, what we can do is we can create a new widget of type WBP custom button, which is just going to have the text for next. Index is just going to be 0 in this case, and we promote that to a variable, call that next button, just so that we have an easy reference to it, because we're going to be deleting it again. And remember how we made this text block in a vertical box? Well, we're going to be using that now, so make sure that our vertical box is set to being a variable, so that we can dynamically add to it. We add a child to it, we're going to be adding our new button. Now with next button, we can assign to onClicked, and we're going to be assigning whatever code is in here to run whenever we click on that button. So whenever we click on that button, we just want to get our dialog box and progress the dialog. Now, we also want to get our dialog box and assign something to that because we have that dialog finished event dispatcher that we haven't been doing anything with yet. So let's get working on that. Connect it up at the end here as well. And when that dialog is finished, we want to get our next button and we want to remove that from its parent so that it deletes itself. And then just to be sure, we also want to unbind all events from dialog finished. Generally, this shouldn't be an issue, but it's good to not accidentally like bind to this twice when the next dialog pops up. So just making sure that everything is unbound the moment the dialog is finished, and then we will rebind when the next dialog pops up, to prevent any potential weirdness in like stupid edge cases that I might not be thinking about right now. Now, let's go back into the designer and make sure that we have in our vertical box here a little bit of room to the top. If we set this dialog box to use a fill and we align it to the bottom, it's going to snap to the bottom of our vertical box, but whenever we add something new to it, so let's just manually add a custom button to it real quick, under it, you can see that it snaps up to make room for that new button. So we'll have room for a handful of buttons like this. And of course, if we go back to the event graph, after we add this child to the vertical box, we can set this to use like different padding and stuff, however we like. What you can do is you can just add that custom button like that. And for some reason my keyboard is messing up. You can just add that custom button like that and just try to like figure out what settings you like. So we can just align this to center instead. If we don't want it to like go all the way from left to right, at which point you go back into your event graph, you cast this to a vertical box slot, set the horizontal alignment to being centered. So now when these get dynamically added, it's only aligned to the very center, which might look a little bit better for you. I don't mind it taking up the entire screen, so we're just going to keep it at that. Make it a little bit easier to click as well. So let's go back into our state tree. There's one more thing that we need to do now that we also are going to be interacting with some buttons, and that is go back into our STT create dialog display, because we need to set input mode to UI only for the get player controller. And we might as well set the widget to focus to our display widget that we just created. And then with the player controller, we also set mouse cursor, or set show mouse cursor to being true, because we're going to be clicking on stuff. And then on the very end here, what we do is we get our player controller and we set mouse cursor back to being false. And now we'll change this test dialog, which just runs this one dialog line that we manually set up like custom. We're going to be changing this up a little bit, or well, let's just make a new task for it actually. State tree task blueprint base, STT, run dialog table. We have a onState enter, and we have a couple of variables. So first and foremost, we have our dialog box, which is going to be of type dialog display. So WBP dialog display, and that will be a input just like we did before, because we require a dialog display to literally do anything. And then we'll also have a dialog table, and that's going to just be a instance editable and exposed variable. It's going to be a data table, or again, if you're using like data assets for this, it was of course going to be like that data asset. We use our dialog box to run dialog table. It's the dialog table that we're going to run. I'm just going to hook up like that. And here we also then get the dialog box from our dialog display. So let's actually change this to dialog display for the name so that everything is clear. We have our dialog display, which holds our dialog box, which has the dialog finished event dispatcher on it. So we're going to assign to dialog finished. And when that dialog finishes, we want to finish this task. So that's how we're going to be moving from one dialog table to the next dialog table, to maybe a choice, to another dialog table, and be able to navigate this state tree. So if we change in the state tree our test dialog now to instead be replaced with a dialog table, we can take our DT dialog 1. It's going to be running this. Need to make sure that this is actually hooked up to the dialog display value, of course. But that should be everything there is to it. So now we can run into this thing, press the F key, it says just text, and it actually straight up doesn't work. Okay, let's see why. Do make sure to hook up the is not valid as well to get next dialog, otherwise things is of course not going to work whenever you don't have any sound. So now I have a face. Do you have a face? Faces are nice. And now when I click next, it's just going to keep going in a loop, and in a loop, and in a loop, and in a loop. Because what it does is it finishes this state, and goes back to root, which goes back into this state. So what we do instead is we set up a transition that when this state is completed, I'm just going to succeed to tree. And when a tree succeeds, it just stops running. It just deletes itself until it runs again, at which point it's going to be a new instance and everything will just be with a clean start. So you can see now if we go through this again, it just closes out and we'll be back. I need to do one more thing, apparently. I skipped over, and that is on create dialog display, the task that we have on the root. At the end, of course, we also need to set our input mode back to game only, because otherwise we're going to be in for a little bit of trouble because we won't be able to walk around anymore. But yeah, so now we can skip through this and we can pick up playing where we left off. So with this, if we now add in a second one of these, so I'll just copy this over, and instead of tree succeeded, this one is now going to be set to next state, and we'll just make a new dialog here, and this is going to be face red, and this is going to be Haiti McFaceface, which is horribly misspelled, and he's going to say, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. So what it's going to do is going to go through this first bit of dialogue, then it's going to go to the next state, go through this dialogue, and then finish the tree. In practice, you wouldn't ever actually need to do this for the most part, because you can just put both of those dialogue characters into one data table. But if for any reason you have a more complex like picker as to what other state it goes into, maybe your dialogue is a little bit more dynamic that way, and after this bit of dialogue it can either go into the Haiti McFace of whatever I call it, or the Lovey McLove face, which sounds very not safe for YouTube, depending on some kind of like friendship stat, in which case you would have two transitions here, and you could transition into either or, which is really where the power of state trees comes in, because the flexibility and the customizability of every individual state's entry and exit conditions really make this worthwhile. So let's set this to dialog 2 and run this so that we can see I have a face, do you have a face, faces are nice, and then we go, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. Which means that we effectively can tell an entire story. We can't make any choices just yet, which we'll get into with the next video, but with this, you can make like 90% of your like visual novel that you want to make or something like that. You can write out your entire story in the data tables now. And just to show you, we can copy over some of these data table rows. So let's just add 3 more rows here. Just going to copy this row as a whole into this one. There you go. And then we can also like copy this into there, and this one into there. Can get rid of this one entirely, because everything is now contained within this first dialogue. So at the end here we are going to go back to tree succeed. And now both of these characters can have a conversation within the one like data table, right? So it goes from one to the other, changes the face, changes the name, without having to like look at another data table or anything like that. Next time we're going to go back in and set up our choices, which is going to be, well, the whole reason that we want to be able to make a dialogue tree, right? Is make choices and show different dialogue as a result. Let's work on setting up dialogue choices so that our dialogue script can turn into an actual dialogue tree. As a fair warning, the way that we're going to set this up initially is going to seem a little over-engineered, but that is because we are going to be able to set this up in a way that will eventually allow us to also make choices that are dynamically added or not added based on some type of input. Let's say maybe you want certain choices to only pop up when you have a certain amount of friendship to a particular character. So the first thing we'll do is we'll make a type of object that's going to hold our choice information. That's the choice name, whether it can be chosen, and whether it has been chosen. And that is just going to be a basic object. So we'll make a blueprint of all classes, basic object, and we'll call that basic choice. You can of course make job blueprints of this to include any other data if you want to make more complex choices that have to hold other type of data, or maybe have certain types of functions. For the most part, just having this basic choice is going to be way enough, because the choosing on whether or not something should be allowed to be chosen will actually be done through a state tree task instead. So we'll add our variables here, can choose, which is going to be instance editable, also exposed on spawn. Then we'll also add a was chosen, which will just keep as is. And then we'll also add a choice name, which is going to be a text that will be instance editable and exposable on spawn. Now with that, let's open up our dialog display, because as you remember, we can add buttons to this. What we're going to do is we're going to be adding one button for every option that we go through. And we're going to do that in a separate widget as well, just to keep things neat and organized. So we're going to make a user interface, widget blueprint, WBP, choice buttons, and that's going to simply contain a vertical box. Let's go into the event graph, and on event construct, we're going to do a for each loop, and we need to make an array to loop over. So let's make this a variable here and call this something like options, and that will be of type basic choice. So we're going to provide in an array of choice objects to see, hey, can they be chosen? And then eventually we'll update one of them to say this one has been chosen. So we'll make that as a variable and turn it into an array instead, and put that into our for each loop. Now, we can pull off this and we can get can choose, because if we can't choose it for whatever reason, which we can set up in any scriptable way that we want, we don't want to add a button for it, obviously. So if this is true, we create a widget, and that widget, of course, is going to be our custom button, which already takes in a text. So we can get the name from choice name, put that into the text, and then we pull through the array index from our loop into the index for this button. Now this index is going to keep counting up even if we don't add a button. So it's very much possible that we get a set of choices that's like index 1, index 5, index 16, and everything in between doesn't get added. And that is very much by design. Anyway, after that, make sure that our vertical box is set to being a variable, so we can pull it into the event graph. And we're going to add a child to that, and we'll add the button that we just created. From that, we'll also bind to onClicked, and he'll add another event dispatcher and call that something like choice made, which also is going to have a parameter to send through the index in the form of an integer. We make a custom event, and that custom event is just kind of only going to call out the choice made and forward the index of whatever we clicked on. And that's the setup for our choice buttons. Now, if you really want to, you could also still wrap this within a scroll box, again, just to keep sure. If you add too many, it doesn't like do weird stuff on your screen or anything, so this might be nice to do. In general, you probably don't want to be adding that many options anyway to a dialog box, so you should be fine. Anyway, now we can go back to our dialog display and go into the event graph and add a new custom event. So that. And we'll call that something like run dialog with choice. This is going to just set new dialog directly. So this is just going to take the dialog box that we have and set new dialog directly, because we only really needed to set one bit of dialog here, because we're going to have a question and then a handful of answers. So we simply do this as a standalone state in our state tree to keep it a little bit more organized and easier to work with. So the very final line of whatever entire story you've written, if there's going to be a question, will be separated out from the rest of the data table. Then we create a widget, which is going to be of type choice buttons. And I did forget to do one thing, so let's go back into the choice buttons real quick, because these options need to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. So if you forgot that just like me, you can go back into your dialog display, just right click and refresh nodes, and now we'll have that input. So we'll also just take that in as an input for the run dialog with choices. I will promote the output here to a variable. Let's call that choice buttons. Again, just for ease of use, so that I can more easily get rid of it later. And I will also pull off of this and assign on choice made. So it makes an event for us already. We'll get back to that in a moment. First, we need to not forget to get our lookup box and add a child to that. And that's of course going to be the button that we just created. Or the set of buttons, rather. Now, when the choice is made, we want to also have an event dispatcher on this. So let's say display choice made. Just name something slightly different so that you can differentiate between the choice made on the buttons and the choice made event dispatcher on the actual display right here. You can technically call them the same thing, but that's going to be confusing, so make sure that you don't confuse yourself. It's also going to just forward the integer. Let's call that index as well. And that's really all that this needs to do. It just needs to, hey, whenever this thing that we have here calls out that a choice has been made, it just needs to forward that information up the chain to the state tree task. Because the state tree won't be able to directly bind to this because we're dynamically creating this. So instead, we're just forwarding that message. And when this has been made, of course, we get our choice buttons and we remove from parents. That's the widget side of the setup. Now let's do the state tree side of the setup. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so that I can see more things on my screen at once. And let's open up the state tree. We have our test dialog. After our test dialog, what we're going to do is we're going to add a sibling state. And instead of tree succeeded, this is going to just move on to the next state. So this is going to be root, test dialog, and then we have our choice to make here. So for that, we need to make a new task that allows us to make choices. We're going to do that in 2 steps. One of them is going to instantiate those custom objects that is going to hold the choice information that we just created. And then one of them is going to take in all of those potential options and actually generate the choices to forward into our UI. So let's start by making the task that creates those objects. So we just make a state tree blueprint base, call it STT create basic choice. And here we're going to make a variable that we're going to call just choice. And that's going to be of type basic choice object, or whatever we call it, basic choice. And that will be a category of output, so that other things in the tree can access this easily. And then we'll also make a variable for the choice name. That's of course going to be a text like everything else. We'll make a state enter here, and on state enter we're simply going to construct an object from class. And in this case that's going to just be a base object for choice. So basic choice is what I called it, which takes in the can choose and the choice name. So the choice name we can get from our variable, which also is going to need to be instance editable, by the way. And because this is just the most basic version of creating a choice, we're just going to hardcode this to always say can choose. But you can see how you can make a task here that has a specific condition that decides whether or not this one can be chosen. Anyway, the output from this is going to be what we use to set the value of that variable that we created for the choice. And that's really all there is to this for now. We'll probably come back to this in a different video later down the line, where I focus on making a couple of examples of these like dynamic choices that you can make. Like add a choice if a certain item is present in somebody's inventory, or if a certain quest has been finished, or something like that. But for now, this is all we have to do. So on the choice, let's actually name this state make choice or something like that. So make choice. We can just add a couple of these tasks. Let's add a task, and we're going to be adding a task for create basic choice, which is going to take in a name. So let's say, let's be friends. And it's going to output a basic choice object reference that we can use in other places in our state tree now. So we just duplicate that like 2 times and give it different names. I hate you. And who are you? Who are? Who are? Okay, I can't type apparently. Who are you? So we have a couple of different options here. We now want to make something that after these options are created takes in those options and generates those option buttons out of them. So let's make a new task out of that as well. So we make a STT pick choice, and this is going to need a couple of variables as usual. So we're first going to have our dialog display, which of course is going to be of type dialog display, as is everything, and that's going to be a category input. Then we're also going to make a variable for the options, and that's going to be the basic choice object that we made, and that's going to be an array because we want to have a variable amount of choices. Sometimes maybe only 2 choices, sometimes maybe up to like 5 or 10, or again maybe not that many, but you never know how many choices you're going to be making in the future. So that's why we make an array, and that's also going to be set to the input category because it's going to need to be populated by the pre-existing outputs. And then we'll just hardcode a dialog struct here. So this will be dialog, the one we made at the very start. It's going to be exposed because that's not going to be an input. We just hardcode the values for that. And with that, we have everything that we need to get going. So let's add a state enter, get our dialog display, run dialog with choice. We just pass in the options and make the dialog actually a single instead of an array. Pass that in as well. The widget is going to take care of everything for us because we already have all of that set up. Now the only thing that we need to do is we need to assign to, apparently I called it display choice made. Already forgot that. But we need to assign a event to that because this will just give us the index of whatever option we picked. So we take the array of options and we just get a copy of whatever index we just clicked on. Now we have a reference to that object, and we have was chosen as a thing that we just get set to true now. Now, this is one thing where you need to pay a little bit of attention, because initially you might be tempted to finish this state, right? So finish task. And that is possible, but what we're going to do is we're going to be adding all of the sub choices that we have here, so all the new dialogue that unlocks based on what we pick, as child states of this, just as like an organizational thing, because it looks a little bit more neat. I'll show you right here what I have in my other project that I have here for reference. That lets you just like collapse the entire choice with all the sub choices with one simple click. The issue is if we finish this state, we can't then move into one of the child states directly, because that's going to cause a weird sort of infinite loop. So we can't finish this state. What we need to do is we need to send an event to this state to tell it that it's finished instead. So let's get rid of the finished task, and instead we send event to the state tree. We can right click that to split the structure pin, and here we can give the event a tag. So I like to make a new tag for this, call this something like dialog.choice. You can really call it whatever you want. It doesn't even need to be like a nested tag or anything. Add that to default gameplay tags.ini, and that's going to be the tag that we send through. Then let's make 3 child states to this one. So this will be option 1. I'm just going to copy this over for option 2 and option 3. So we're kind of quickly going to go through this. And here we're going to explicitly set up all of the transitions from this state into its potential children. There is also a thing that you could do where you make a substate here that would be like adding a child state to this, and this will be like a state picker, and put all these 3 within that, and just let this try select children in order, and then put entry conditions on every one of these states. In my opinion, that just clutters up your entire tree, and you're going to need to put those entry conditions on every state as well anyway. So you might as well just make that the transition conditions to begin with, I would say, because that lets you just make these direct children of the choice state, and that just keeps your entire tree a little bit cleaner, especially as your dialogue tree starts getting more complex. Adding in unnecessary indents and unnecessary states in general is going to be annoying, so that's why we're going to do it the way we are going to do it. But if you prefer it the other way, it's entirely fine as well. But in order to make those transitions, we're going to need to set up our own condition, because it's going to be very tedious to do otherwise. So let's make a state tree condition, call it STC for state tree condition, check choice. And this is relatively simple. We just override the receive test condition, and we take in a variable for the choice. That's going to, of course, be of type basic choice, as we've been working with so far. That's going to be in the category for inputs, because, again, it's going to be an input value. That's going to be bound to the output from another thing. And we simply just take this and we get was chosen. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now we simply have a condition that we just need to link a choice to a choice output from another part of the state tree, instead of every single time having to go through and find that choice and then find the was chosen, because that just gets tedious, right? So now we can very easily just say, hey, make choice, add 3 different transitions. Going to set those all up to be on event, and then the event tag is going to be dialog choice. We can copy over the required event. You can't quite copy over the entire transition because it actually instances them, so it's actually going to be the same transition 3 times. That seems like a bug with the engine. Maybe in the future that'll be fixed. But for now, just don't go around copying too much things in state trees, because it doesn't seem like it's really like made to deal very well with that. And then the condition that we're going to do is going to be our custom condition, which is check choice. And the choice that we're going to be checking is, we'll give these custom names as well to make them a little bit easier to read. So this will be friendly. And then this one will be hateful. And this one we'll call confused. So we can say, okay, for this first choice, that's going to go to option 1. So we're going to set this up to option 1. We're going to check friendly choice. Then for number 2, we're going to go to option 2, and we're going to be checking, again, the check choice. And we'll be checking the hateful. And the last condition is going to be check choice again, and we can check confused.choice. Option 1, 2, 3, at the end of which we're all just going to be successing the tree. So we make transition on state complete, we simply success tree. And actually, just to show you on option 3, what I want to do is I want to go back to the make choice. Just to show you that that is a thing that we very much can do. So I'm just going to get rid of some of the dialogue that I put in the first tree, so that we have a second one all ready to go, and then we'll just like add 2 more. I'm just gonna kind of like wing it with this one. Honestly, I'm just going to be changing the name and the face, so target, and then for this one we'll just call this arrow. So now technically we have 3 or 4 different data tables. Of course, they don't have actually like got different dialogue, but they will work with different dialogue. That's the entire point. So dialogue 2, and then we'll run dialogue table with dialogue 3 as well, and one more, run dialogue table with dialogue number 4. Oh, and of course, all of these do need to manually be set to using the dialogue display that we create in the root. I have tried looking into if you can automate that by making this a context variable. The answer is probably technically yes, but effectively not really worth looking into because it's a massive headache. And we can do the pick choice. Make sure that that's the last one, because I do think that these get executed in order. We set this, of course, up to be our dialog display as well. And then we can just add these 3 choices as friendly.choice, hateful.choice, and confused.choice. We set up our dialog with, I think it's the friendly face that does our first dialog. Question, dude, what do you think? And that'll do for now. For this make choice state, it is important, however, to change the selection behavior from try selecting children in order to just try and answer, because otherwise it's going to do this and immediately try to do one of its children, which obviously is not what we want. What we want is for it to wait until we tell it with that event to move through and then select one of the child states. So now we can walk up to this thing and talk, hey, I have a face. Do you have a face? Faces are nice. And there we see he changed it to question dude, because we now are no longer reading from the data table. It's the one singular dialogue that we provided it with. And here we can say, let's be friends. And he says, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. And that ends our dialogue. But we can restart the dialogue, and if we go, who are you? That's the third option that we set up to loop back around to the start of our dialogue. It says, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. But you can see that is now the arrow, because it's actually running a different data table. And then it loops back around to the question, because that is how we have set up the connections. So with that idea in mind, you can definitely see that, hey, maybe here in option 1, instead of running this dialogue instantly, what we can do is we can replace this with, let's do 2 pick choices. So pick choice 1, we do a pick choice, and then we create 2 more choices. So we create a basic choice. Let's duplicate that real quick, and we say, we're friends now, maybe more than friends. And you would think that initially we can now have 2 different dialogue responses to that. But in reality, we might be able to have 4 dialogue responses to that, because we're looping back around from having done number 3. So our number 3 option object, which still exists in memory and still is accessible, is readable. So we can now do 4 different things, and I'll just kind of like draw it out, right? We can do 1 for immediately going into state number 1 and then choosing the first option. We can do 1 for immediately going into state number 1 and then doing the second option. But we can also do 1 for first going into state number 3, then looping back around into this, right? I'm gonna actually draw these as arrows. Then picking option number 1, and then picking the first choice from this, or picking the second option from this. And you can see that this starts becoming potentially very complex very quickly, and you can actually make like very responsive dialogue with this. Of course, if you want to write this level of responsive dialogue, you're going to need to do a lot of writing and a lot of like building out of these trees. But this is entirely a thing that you can fairly easily do. It takes a lot of work to do, but it's not very technically difficult to do. So the way that you could fairly easily do that is adding these states. So that would be, I'm just going to call this like 1, 1. We're going to add the sibling states to this. This will be 1, 2. So that would be option 1, option 1, option 1, option 2. Another sibling state. This would be first going to 3 and then coming back around to option 1, and then first doing option 3 and then coming back around to do option 2. These could all have their own dialogue responses, which then also can all have their own potential different outputs. Maybe this goes into a subtree of option 2 that's only accessible through this weird roundabout path, but then finishes out the hateful path of this dialogue somehow, because maybe what you do is you're confused and then you say, no, actually I want to be more than friends, and then that leads you to option 2, which is hate, because the character's like, hold on, I think you're messing with me, I don't think I like you. You can be very creative with this, is my main point. For now though, I'm going to get rid of all these because we don't really want to be doing that. And all of this is not even taken into account yet what we can do when we gate options behind unlocking them. Again, with things like items, specific scripts for unlocking specific options, or simply like stat checks. Maybe if you have more than a certain amount of HP, certain things are open, certain friendship stats, whatever you can think of. So that's it as far as making choices on a basic level goes. Next time, I think what we're going to do is we're going to do something slightly different from going into the dynamic choices immediately, because I want to do something that might keep you a little bit more sane and show off how you can choose between entirely different dialogue trees as a whole. Because obviously you don't want to get all of the dialogue of one character, especially if it's like a big character that you talk to a lot, all in one tree, because that's going to be a mess and difficult to navigate. So you want to split it up into different trees. Maybe if you're actively doing a certain quest, you want to specifically just display the dialogue tree that goes with that quest. And then when the quest is finished, maybe it displays a different dialogue tree from either during or before the quest. You don't really want to set all of that up inside of the tree itself. So that's what we're going to be looking at next time. Without actually having a quest system, obviously, because that's an entire different thing on its own, which I might make a state tree quest system once this is done. I expect this video to be a bunch shorter than the videos that we've done before this, but I wanted to section this off into its own video because it is kind of its own little topic. Last time we set up a bunch of stuff to make dialogue choices in our tree possible. So we can now choose in a dialogue box and we'll have different results based on what we click on. And we can even loop back around through the same question and we can just kind of guide our dialogue through however we want. But if you're going to make all of your dialogue in a single dialogue tree, obviously that's not ideal because that's going to grow out of proportion super quickly. So what I want to talk about is making this like little speaker blueprint that we have a little bit more intelligent with what dialogue tree it actually runs. So let's make a copy of our dialogue tree and call it dialogue tree test 2. And for ease of use, I'm just going to make it say something different on the choice so that I don't have to write out like an entire separate set of dialogue tables because I'm bad at writing. So at pick choice, we're just going to go into the dialogue and make it show this circle. Why not? The name will be new dialogue and the text will be haven't I seen you before. We're going to go into the state tree component here and we'll actually change this state tree itself. I'll copy it over one more time because this state tree itself is actually going to kind of just disappear as a whole. So we'll make this root entirely empty, so get rid of the tasks. And what we're going to do is we'll add a child state, and this child state will be of type linked asset, and that'll either link to state number 1 or state tree number 1 rather, and then we'll add another one which will link again to a linked asset which will be state tree number 2. So this way you can manage them a little bit easier. So when this state tree runs, of course, it's going to go through a root, and then it's going to not try to select children in order, it's just going to try to enter. And then we'll set up the transitions for these either like by event or by some kind of other transition condition. So we're going to set up all of the logic for which state trees to go through in here. You can do that with a couple of substates as well, if you really want to. If nothing else, to keep things organized, so we can make like a child state here, which can be before quest 1. And then we can add in another child state here, which can be after quest 1, which can have a couple of child states for whatever else you might be doing. So this way you can set up some more complex logic for what state tree to run. So let's just make a quick mock-up of something like this so that we can see how that would work in practice, right? So we have state tree test 1, and then during the quest we have state tree test 2. And after the quest we would have a handful of potential other ones, which we're just going to make a state tree test 3 for real quick, which is going to have yet another choice icon for us. So into the dialogue, and we'll just pick this like basic one and call quest finished. Hey, I know you. And maybe we even like get rid of these options here. It's just, hey, I know you. And then when the choice is made, instead of going to any other place, we just finish this state and we like delete these other two. And we can even get rid of this condition. So now we have a third one as well. So we can make this once again a linked asset that runs as a whole. Now do be aware that the linked assets here still do need to have a transition set up to complete this tree that they are in as well. So on state complete, we finish this, and then on state complete for this one, we also finish the tree for every single one of these. And now since we're scripting this out more specifically, what we can do is we can set this context actor to be a very specific type. So we can set this to being BP speaker, and we can just kind of store a lot of information on BP speaker. Meaning that after we talk to you the very first time, so going back into state tree test 1, we can add a task here. Change this to BP speaker as well, because this is only going to ever run on BP speaker. because this is his dialogue specifically. And your major characters are going to likely have a class to themselves. So this is very much something that you can set up this way. Let's make a new task here. And I'm going to just kind of do this semi-hacky. In that we're going to do this as STT spoken to speaker. Obviously you would make a state tree task that's a little bit more reusable, maybe calls like a interface or whatever. Realistically what you would do instead is you would make the condition something that checks your quest system to see, hey, has this quest been started? Has it been finished? Whatever. But we don't have a quest system to hook into, so I'm just going to set up a variable on this guy that's going to count up the amount of times that we've talked to him. So BP speaker itself is going to have I'm just going to call it index integer. And then spoken to speaker, we can make a variable of type BP speaker. And what I'm simply going to do is on enter state, we're going to take this BP speaker, we're going to get the index that we made, and we're simply going to increment it. And of course, we want to make that speaker variable context so that it gets automatically populated. And that's all that this task is going to do. So anytime I enter this, we're going to add that task, spoken to speaker. And now we can either explicitly set up the transitions in here, or we can go back to try to select children in order and give these the entry conditions. I think for this setup, making these entry conditions makes a little bit more sense. So that's the way that we're going to do it. It's going to try to enter this one first. If it can't, it's going to enter this one. If it can't, it's going to enter this one. So since this is going to count up from 0 to 1 before it enters one of these, we're going to set up the entry condition here to be a integer compare. And we're going to be comparing our actor's index to a value of 1. So if actor index is 1, it's going to do this. And then entry condition here, integer actor index 2. And obviously then for this one, we do entry condition integer actor index. I didn't type an X, I just realized, number 3. So now every time I talk to him, it's going to run a different one of these trees. Quick fix. Entry condition actually happens apparently after it's found the initial state to go into. So it actually does need to start counting from 0. This doesn't really matter for the system. This is just an off by 1 error that I made. Again, this is just for demonstration purposes anyway. For an actual game, you would have actual like systems to hook into to decide this kind of stuff. And now you will see, if we look up to this, I had an error there before, don't mind that. I have a face. Do you have a face? Faces are nice. Everything that we've seen before. We enter dialogue. Now it's counted up 1, so it's going to be running an entirely different dialogue tree to begin with. So we have the same thing, but we can see it's a different tree because it now has new dialogue with a different image, which is actually the same dialogue tree otherwise. So like, let's just skip through this. And now that we've done that, we can very easily just check, hey, I have a face. Do you have a face? Faces are nice. Hey, I know you. Because it's the 3rd time that we're talking to him. So we can say whatever we want and that just finishes it because that's how we set up that tree. Now, it's going to have a bit of an issue here because the way that I have this set up, it's actually checking the entry condition here, whether or not it is equal to. We should probably check whether or not it is greater than or equal to, because we want to just have that as its final dialogue. That's always going to do. But again, this just integer checking is mostly a proof of concept to show you guys how to like navigate with these different subtrees to keep things organized. If you have an inventory system, if you have a quest system, you would be hooking into that to look up conditions based on those things instead. Maybe after I make a quest system, I will merge the 2 projects together and make a video specifically about how those things work together. Because I find that I get a decent amount of questions of people who've seen like 2 or 3 different system tutorials and don't really know how to like hook those into each other. So that might be like valuable to do in the future. But for now, just try to figure it out how to hook in other systems into this instead of setting up like specific integer requirements, because that's obviously not how you're actually going to do this. Again, I know this was a little bit of a shorter video, but the last video ended up being relatively long, and it's not really gonna fit too well with the next video, because I want to talk a little bit more about those like dynamic choices. So this is a bit of a shorter video in the middle here, and next time will maybe also be slightly shorter, because it's not that complicated. These are things that I want to show as more or less proof of concepts of what you can do with the system as we have it set up now. I think for now this is going to be the final video in this dialogue series, so let's get right into it. We pretty much have everything set up that we need to make more complex dialogue options, and I want to explore that a little bit with you guys. So, as you've seen in the previous videos, hopefully, we have this dialogue tree now that can pick other dialogue trees to run based on some sort of information input. Obviously right now we're just incrementing an integer to like go through these. In a real scenario, you would have a quest or an inventory system to base all of this off of. Maybe you could even do this through a behavior tree that actually like goes through and picks and then runs a state tree as a result of that. That's something that you can do, because behavior trees are very good at just running through linearly and making a single choice. So that's maybe a situation where you can really combine behavior trees and state trees in a very cool way. But what I want to look at right now is these individual trees that we have here. So I'm just going to go back to using test tree 1 to run on this, because what I want to do is I want to add some more flexibility to these choices. Right now we just have something that makes a friendly choice, a hateful choice, and a confused choice. But what if we want to make these dependent on some kind of input? Right now all we have is just something that adds a choice, gives us an output for that choice object with a name as an input. But what if we want to be able to gate those behind unlocking them? Well, that's actually remarkably not that difficult. So the way that I like to do that is to find our create basic choice. You can make a copy of this, or you can make a child blueprint of it. I'm going to go with child blueprint because that's technically better, because if you end up adding anything to the base choice, it'll propagate to all the children. In this case, if you just want to make a copy of it, it effectively works the same way. So let's create a child blueprint class and call this STT friend-based choice or something like that. And the reason that I say that it's effectively the same as just making a copy of it, if I press this button and open the blueprint editor for this, is because we're going to have to just kind of like redo all of this anyway in the onState enter. We're overriding all the code that it does to begin with. The only thing that we're getting here is easy access to the exact same variable names. So we still have the choice name, we still have the choice as an output. The only thing that we're going to be changing here is can choose won't just be set to true always. What we're going to do here is we'll set a friendship value, which is going to be a float value, and that's going to be a input category. And then we'll also have a needed friendship or friendship threshold or whatever you want to call it, and that's just going to be a simple exposed variable. And we'll simply check if friendship value is greater than or equal to the needed friendship that we have, and that's then going to go into our can choose for our basic choice object. And it's really as simple as that. We can use this for like HP checking. Again, you can use this to check whether or not certain items are in the inventory, so you unlock new, maybe like secret Easter egg dialogue or whatever. Hey, so yeah, during the editing, I'm actually butting in here real quick because I realized that the way we did this is 99% alright and okay to do, but the fact that we're copying over those nodes into every single state tree task that we're doing to make one of these choice objects is a little bit weird. So the way that I would actually end up doing this is, instead of making a new construct based choice object in every single one of these state tree tasks, which you very much still can do if at any point you decide, hey, I need to make a separate type of object that needs to hold specific other functions or specific other data or whatever, you still can just copy over this node and just change the class that you're constructing. But for 99% of the cases, this base object choice is going to be all that you're going to need. So what we can do instead is going back into the basic make choice and just create a function here and call that something like choice condition. And that's going to have an output of just a bool parameter, which we'll call condition as well. The default implementation of this is just going to be a return true, but now we can run that function to choose whether or not we can choose this option. And from here, it'll be as easy as going into our friendship choice after we've compiled this. And now we can simply overwrite that choice condition. So we can take all of this out of here. We don't need to redo enter state condition. We can just edit our choice condition. We don't need to call to the parent function for it anymore. We can just simply hook this up like this. And that'll make it a lot easier to make a bunch of different ones of these tasks, because you don't have to go over copying a bunch of nodes every single time. It'll just construct everything with the name and all that kind of stuff in the basic make choice, and the only thing that you have to edit is overriding the choice condition function that we just made in any of the child blueprints that we make. Because obviously I'm recording this after the fact, so you're going to see me doing the thing where I copy over this node and like do other weird stuff with it. But this is the much easier setup to scale up and actually work with long term. So let's add in one more secret option. That is add a new task. Now we can do the STT friend-based choice, which we're going to put up above the choice picker, because again, I think it does these in chronological order. And we have a friendship needed of 10, let's say. And for now, I'm just going to make a global parameter for our friendship. That's the wrong thing, global parameter for our friendship. So that's just going to be float. Let's give it a new name as well. Let's call this friends. And I'm going to set this to a value of 5 for demonstration purposes. So we'll use that global parameter as a check. Again, obviously, if you have like a friendship system, this would hook into that through either a direct reference to like your player character, some kind of component on that, maybe an interface call, whatever really. And the choice name is I love you, marry me. If you have a friendship stat of 10 with anybody, assuming that it goes up to like a scale of hundreds, maybe don't say this. Anyway, now we have this as a possibility, and we can very easily just add this as a dialog option. So let's call this option 4. And I'll show you a quick little fun thing. We can replace this with a dialog with choice. So a pick choice, and then just create a dialog with whatever face we want. Name is Mr. Gray or whatever. Text is please leave me alone. And then add a basic choice creator, and we'll just call this next. And that'll effectively just make a next button with one dialog option without us needing to make a dialog table with one entry. Now, is making a dialog table with one entry probably easier than doing this? Well, that's entirely up to you, but this should, by all accounts, just work. The only difference to keep in mind is that if you're doing this, you have to go use transition on event and then take your dialog.choice event to do this with, and then we'll set this to tree succeeded as well. Because of course the dialog choices don't actually finish the states. Very much by design, I should add. So let's hook up the dialog display here, and then we also needed to hook up one other thing that it's complaining about in the options. That makes sense. We create one option and we use this one down here, I believe. Now we make a choice, so we add one more transition to the bottom here. It's going to be on event, and again, event required. You know the drill by now, dialog.choice, and that's going to transition to number 4. And that'll have the condition of checking the dialog choice, and we gave it a name, yeah, just friend-based choice. So friend-based choice.choice. And then in our choice picker, as the final thing here, in the make choice, the initial one that we have, we need to also add this choice to the array. Now, you're going to notice that our friendship is at 5 and it needs to be at 10 for this thing to even show up. So if we now go ahead and play the game, you'll see that nothing is actually different like at all. We still have 3 choices. But if I set this friendship now to like 15, something 10 or greater, could have also just set it to 10, but hey, here we are. going through, you will now see that we have a fourth option. It doesn't quite fit on screen, ignore that for the time being, but we can say, I love you, marry me. And then it says, please leave me alone. And again, you can see that the little trick that we did worked. It's probably still just easier to make a singular line in a singular table, but I just wanted to show you that as a trick. So this now suddenly allows for really interesting, weird stuff, right? We can say, hey, when we exit this option, I want to increase my friendship. Or when we exit some option, right? We have like the friendly option, I think is option number 1. Let's be friends, yeah? So this does 3 succeed. But maybe what this should do instead is it should transition us back to make choice. And we should add a new task. Let's make one real quick. STT increase friendship. When we enter any given state with this task on it, what we're going to do is we'll add a variable for the property, and that will be of type property state tree property reference. Now, this is kind of a weird variable type. If you compile this, you can see that we can choose the type of property that we want to work with. So that's going to be a float in this case. Then we get the properties reference out of that, which gives us a reference to that type of property. And with that, we can just add a certain amount. So let's say we add 5 points whenever we do this. And then we set variable by reference to that new value. So now we have a task that effectively increases our friendship anytime we do it. So whenever we enter option 1, we're going to add the task for increase friendship, which is one of these somewhere here. Yeah, there we go. Obviously, this does need to be a input or just exposed, but we're going to make it an input because it's actually super relevant. And we're going to be updating our friendship parameter with that. Now, do be mindful that in any version under Unreal 5.5.4, this mechanism is broken and won't work in packaged builds. It'll actually just crash your game. So you do need to be on a fairly recent version of Unreal Engine in order to be able to set variables from your parameters in a dynamic way like this. But we'll see if we now talk to this guy, our first time around, we're only going to have these 3 options. But if I say, hey, I want to be friends, it's going to loop back around, and now our friendship status is higher, and it has unlocked our new option. I think you guys at this point kind of get the gist. You can effectively do this with whatever you want. Again, if you have an inventory system, you can do like query inventory and just provide that in to your can choose. If an item is in the inventory, an option might pop up. Otherwise, it's not going to pop up. If your friendship is higher than a certain amount, it's going to pop up. Otherwise, not. If your health is under a certain amount, maybe you unlock a path that allows you to like get free healing items that way or something like that. You simply make a new state tree task for every type of check that you want to do, and you just construct a basic choice and you decide can choose based on some type of comparison or querying or whatever. If you really need to do something super fancy, you can always make a child blueprint as well of this basic choice. So let's call this friendship choice. For friendship, I don't think it's particularly needed. And I don't really see a lot of situations where it would be needed. But you can make something where you add a new variable here. So let's say maybe we have, I don't know, the location of a certain actor for some reason is needed to do anything within here. Again, I don't really see a lot of reasons that you would do this, but I just want you to show that it is possible. So if we then go back into this one and we change this to a friendship choice, it still will save out to the variable for the basic choice because friendship choice is a child class of the basic choice. And you can now get that location, I called it love by accident, that actually kind of makes sense what we're talking about, and like do something with. Effectively, probably not going to be that relevant because any data that this thing has, you're going to be providing in yourself, so you might as well just do it out here. But if you have a bunch of different state tree tasks that can provide in data, then maybe the object can do something with that and output other data with that, or functions with that. Do whatever you want. You can make different classes to work with if you really need to. That's the magic of doing something as simple as making like these choice options entirely object-based, because it does allow you to be flexible with adding inheritance-based hierarchies in your project structure. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And of course, an extra massive thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas, and my Cave Student tier supporters, Oiku and Earl Monsville Urno.